Welcome to Engaging and Empowering School Libraries podcast. This podcast is dedicated to raising the profile of school libraries by exploring topics that are shaping education and teaching today. Whether it's innovative learning strategies, the role of technology, or collaboration between teachers and librarians, we're here to spark conversations and share ideas that make a difference. I'd like to start by introducing Learnix, our new podcast sponsors. If you are a school librarian teaching credible sources, outlining and research skills, Learnix is here to help. Learnix simplifies the research process by tracking students' searches, website visits, and notes, and then organizes everything into an easy to navigate format. The platform also creates perfectly formatted bibliographies and generates a snapshot report that provides valuable insights into each student's research habits. Visit learnix.com to learn more and to schedule a demo. Mention that you heard about Learnix from Engaging and Empowering School Libraries podcast to receive 20% off your subscription. At the heart of Engaging and Empowering School Libraries is my training membership. It's designed to inspire and motivate school librarians to be 10% braver in their roles, providing a supportive community where you can grow your confidence, share experiences, and develop new skills. If you're looking to connect with like-minded professionals and take your school library to the next level, then visit elizabethahutchinson.com to find out more. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hi, I'm delighted to be joined by school librarians Donna Baird and Jennifer Horan. I hope I've got that right. You may correct me afterwards. As well as my usual co-host, Ruth Maloney. So welcome, everyone. Did I get your name right, Jennifer?
It's Horan, so almost there.
Horan. Well, it's a good start. We've got names almost right. But before we start, just wanted to share some exciting news with you all. We celebrated the fact that we had 10,000 downloads since we started our podcast this week. A large number for a couple of librarians chatting about the importance of school libraries. I wanted to thank all our guests over the years for spending time with us and sharing their expertise. But let's continue to today's episode by a few introductions. So could you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves, and can we start with Donna, please? Hi.
Hello, my name is Donna Baird and I have been a school librarian for over 30 years. I've mainly worked in Scotland and I work at two very, very large secondary schools, and I have a passion for all things Scottish, all things teen, but at the moment I'm really interested in AI, like many school librarians are.
Fantastic, brilliant. And Jennifer, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Jennifer Horan. I was a school librarian for around 10 years. I'm now head of children's services, both public and secondary schools. And I'm past chair of YLG, the Youth Libraries Group, and the Carnegie Medals too.
Fantastic. So hopefully the people that are listening might have an inkling about what we're going to chat about today. But we've decided with the Carnegie Medal due and coming out, the shortlist coming out or has come out, that maybe we will discuss teenage fiction today. So teenage fiction is often a gateway to lifelong reading. So I'm going to start with you, Donna. What do you think makes a book truly engaging for teens, and how do you spot a book that will fly off the shelves?
After 30 years experience, you'd think I would know, but I don't. I think that would be some kind of magic wand that I could have, and I'd be able to put what we all want, which is the right book in the right child's hands. But so many young people have so many diverse needs and diverse abilities, and we're also living in very much a golden age of young adult fiction, that they have so much choice. So perhaps it's a little bit overwhelming for them. So I think that, I suppose the magic in it is the school librarian, knowing your pupils, knowing your stock, and hopefully being able to put it in the right hands for young people.
Absolutely. Jennifer, what about you? Do you think what is it about teenage fiction that makes it truly engaging? What do you reckon?
I think books that young people can relate to are always a great starting point. As Donna said, you kind of get to know the child individually, and then you think what might suit them. So thinking about what's going to really engage with this child, what's going on in their life that a book can really kind of tap into. But there'll be some children who want something completely different, who don't want realism at all, those who want to stick with what they know. So it's just knowing what's out there and just being able to give them that range of books that they can try and just see what they like.
So do you think children, or teenagers in particular, do you think they've changed in the last years that you've been working with them, Donna? Do you think what teenagers like now is different from what they liked, 10 years ago?
To be honest, probably not. Teenagers, despite all the tech and all the kind of handbag clutching that everybody throws onto them in society, they're all just the same because they're all just people, and they're all young people wanting to engage with a story. Hopefully they want to engage with a story. So again, it's still our job has become a little bit different, but the children are still the children in front of us now, and I think that we can't see them any other way, and our role must be to serve what they need.
Yeah. So social media, it's funny, you've just sort of said, social media has had a huge influence, hasn't it? And on what teenage read, I'm thinking particularly with TikTok and the like. Do you think that this impacts students' reading habits and therefore your buying decisions? Jennifer, shall I bring you in here? Do you think we should be guiding them towards great fiction or giving them what they think they want?
I think to begin with, what they want is what's going to hook them in. I think often when you're working in a school, you've got that sort of contradiction with what they're being told to read in school, what they have to read, and which often isn't engaging them and isn't what they want. So if you can give them something that they've seen on TikTok or they've heard other people talking about, that's a great gateway for them that hopefully leads on to being able to read other things as well.
Yeah. And what about you, Donna? Do you think that has had an influence?
I certainly do, but I also make sure that my pupils are well aware that a lot of these bookfluencers are actually paid for, and that they're just mouthpieces. It's an advert like advertising soap powder. We like to think that books are loftier items, but they're not. They're just simply products. And again, I want my pupils to come from a place of knowledge no matter what they're doing. So if they know that it's somebody that they like is advertising a product, that's great. But if they don't know that someone is actually, this is paid for, or they haven't actually read the book and are just simply reading out what they've been given, then that always concerns me. I also think it's the same books that we're seeing over and over and over again. So whilst it can be a turn on for some pupils, I think for others it's a complete turn off, because we're not seeing marginalised groups being influenced heavily by book talk, because it's the same Sarah J. Maas books over and over and over again, but not smaller publishers or maybe a more diverse audience.
Yeah. Are you finding the same, Ruth? Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny. I was thinking about the first question, how I spot a book that will fly off the shelves, and I spot it because it looks like every other book that's on TikTok. It's got a black cover often. It's got leaves or vines or flowers and some kind of romance fantasy feel to it. It's going to fly off the shelf. But that's not, I mean, I agree. There's this kind of pull them in with the things they really want, but there's so much more. And it's that old thing about, if you like this, you could also try. And trying to get that message over to them is really difficult. I have not gone down the book talk made me buy it display thing, because they don't need it. They need the you've never seen this book, but you might like it anyway display, I think.
Do you hear, like, because I don't work in schools these days, and certainly not with teenagers. Do you find that there is talk about book talk, or is it something that's just sort of a social media thing? Is it? You're nodding your head, Ruth.
I hear it. There's a book at the moment that everybody wants called Powerless. It's the first of a series. Powerless, Reckless. I don't know. It's black. It's got flowers on the front. And they all want it. And I had never come across it because my socials are not the same as their socials. And I said to them, where did you, oh, TikTok, you know, okay, fine. So I have bought it, but it's very much, you know, then I want to get to know the students, and then I want to see, okay, what is it about that, you know, because the Fourth Wing, have you read those, Donna?
No, they're not
No.
suitable for schools.
No, well, I bought those. That's another series that they are all buying because it's all over whatever socials they're on. But it's one of those books which is just a compilation of every other fantasy novel, dystopian novel, teen, you know, that kind of teen book that you've ever read. And I really, you know, I have explored that with some of them. Okay, so what is this? What's going on? And why do you think this is worth reading? Because I got a third of the way in and thought, nope, don't need any more of that. So where's that going? What are you going to read now that is going to prove me right and you wrong? In the very best possible way.
Yeah, you know, so that is the problem, isn't it? That with social media, you have to have the knowledge and understanding of the books that they are talking about, and you also have to be able to judge, vet, make sure it's appropriate. So with budgets being so tight, you can't possibly buy everything that they're seeing on something like BookTok, can you? You know, so it must be quite difficult to decide whether a book that's gone, you know, viral, I suppose that's the word, on BookTok, if it's worth putting your budget into. Is there any way that you could check without necessarily having to buy all these books? What's the process? Is there one?
Well, I think for me is I follow some of the socials that young people would follow as well, just to pretend I'm youthful. I also have 2 teenagers in my house that I can use. They're not trapped; they are my children, so I can use them if I need to. But I often have honest conversations with my pupils because they don't have the experience that we do. So, such as like a book like Powerless that you mentioned is actually just a rip-off of a different book called, is it Red Queen? By Victoria Aveyard, and I say I'm refusing to buy that, but you should read this. Something like Fourth Wing, I'd heard rumblings about how it had mature content. Pupils are often asking for a book, I'm sure you've all heard, called Haunting Adeline as well, which has extremely mature content in it. But again, the other side is that from the front covers, sometimes you can't tell. Some of the Icebreaker book, you can't tell because it's cartoonish, and young people don't realise. And if they go into a bookshop and buy it, at least they've got us in a library going, let's hold back here. But if they go into a bookshop, Watterson's will just take their money, and their parents will look at it and go, at least they're reading something. Go, turn to page 48 and tell me that story. So I think we have to be hyper vigilant and hypercritical. And again, with our budgets, I think we are just very cautious anyway. That we have to be just very careful.
I think so.
I wonder if perhaps it's got more difficult. I haven't been in a school library where we've had a rep. I know when I first started, there were occasionally 1 or 2 reps who used to come round and would try, you know, would sell me, would talk to me about what was what. I can't buy anything without seeing it first. So I don't get anything on approval. Everything I buy, I have to buy blind, which is fine for some things. I have no problem with that. But for other things, and I have made mistakes in the past, you know, I've bought either, worst of all, I've bought a whole series, or I've bought a book and thought, actually, this is really not right, you know, but it's whatever it is, you know, if you're lucky, it's £6 down the drain. If you're unlucky, it was a hardback and, you know, you're stuck. And I think perhaps was easier with reps, although they came with other disadvantages, I'm sure, but
yeah. No, I remember when the reps coming around and buying that way. It is so nice to have a book in your hand that you can, you know, truly look at and see whether it's suitable or not. Yeah, it makes buying hard these days, I do think. But one of the things that I was really interested, Ruth and I had a conversation about teenage fiction, which is what brought this podcast to life, really, was the fact that it feels, or it seems, that teenage fiction often gravitates towards heavy themes rather than humour. Do you think that this is true? And do you think that this reflects what teenagers want? Or is it more about what the publishers think will sell? Can I bring Jennifer in to give us her view on that?
Yeah, I think we always go through phases of publishers like to publish all the same thing. Something takes off and is really popular, and they want in on that. And we do kind of see it coming there. And I think young people do read what's out there, so they see lots of books on a particular theme. They will want to engage and they want to read. But I think what we are talking about, we talk about all the hard hitting books, and that's what we see advertised. But there are so many that are really funny, that are really light-hearted. They're there as well. They're just maybe not getting the same publicity that some of the harder hitting ones are. Maybe they're not making the awards lists like others as well. So that's maybe we're just not seeing them, but I do think they are there.
Well, that's good. That is good to hear. What about you, Donna? Do you think the heavy themes are what our students want?
For the amount of pupils, like older teenagers, that ask me for funny books, that I don't really think, contrary to what you're saying, Jennifer, please give me a list. I don't think that there's enough out there. You know, we get to Diary of a Wimpy Kid and all the Wimpy Kid alikes, which, to be honest, are reading age of 9, 10. But I still have fourth years that are reading it because they want something light and they want something fun, but it's not really something of their age group. And I think that there's a real gap in the market there. But there's also that idea that I think that permeates literature, that something as funny is lesser than something that's hard-hitting and gritty. You know, look at a comedy show and everybody goes, oh, well, that's nice, but oh my goodness, look, I've really felt something at the other one, you know. And also, for all of us that have taught, trying to make teenagers laugh is absolutely murder. So maybe we've got the two sides to that as well. But I wish there was more funny books out for teenagers, just so that because I think humour can deal with very dark issues as well. And I think it's an interesting way to do it, rather than just shoving everything right in their face when teenagers are already a mess of hormones and acne and weird smells.
It's interesting you say that, Donna, because I think, you know, if I ask around and I'm pointed towards kind of teen YA funny, I get Nathaniel Lesor, who's twice Carnegie nominated, whose books make me laugh out loud, but they are issue. This one is about knife crime or school violence, and you know, the last one was about online bullying, really. Or I'm pointed at William Sutcliffe. Well, his last funny book was about the environment and the climate crisis. They are funny, but they're not funny. They're not like Jeeves and Wooster funny, you know? They're not, and that I would say Jeeves and Wooster is good literature. I agree with you that humour is often looked down on, but I think, you know, or even Barbara Pym, that kind of gentle funny. I know they're not intended for children. I push my kids towards, not my own children, but the school children towards Jeeves and Wooster, because some of them will appreciate that kind of thing. And I know that comes with all sorts of stuff, but I don't find, and I haven't found, teen fiction which is just, you know, an adventure with a funny, you know, with a funny story, or just life happening to people and it's funny, you know. It is all dark, told through a funny lens, I think. And I'm none the wiser whether that's what they need or want, or whether that's what they're being fed. But I am asked by parents for things that are not so heavy. Can I give them a book that is not going to end up with their child in tears? And beyond about year 8, no.
It's really hard, and it's funny because I've not really thought about the fact that funny books are seen as lesser than a serious book. but I can see the connection. And I'm trying to think of some of the things that the students that I was working with were reading. And there were very few just nice story, bit of a laugh out loud. Then seems to be now that there has to be a deep theme. But Jennifer, you said that you think that they are there, but maybe they're not so obvious.
Yeah, I definitely think they come in the form of themed books. I wonder if that is because we expect our young people to be reading older, young people who want to be older than they are, maybe that think your wimpy kid are maybe a bit too babyish and they want to have that challenge. Maybe when they actually start reading, they think this isn't what I want after all. I want something more lighthearted. But I think that can also be one of the reasons why we're seeing more and more of the issue books, because it's publishers thinking, is this what our young people are wanting? We have the debate about teen books and young adult books, and I have a colleague who says we should have a new adult section. We should have a section that's not quite adult but not young people either, and it's just kind of easing them into the adult reading.
Yeah.
I think that should be something that any publishers listening that want to get onto that could be a new spot in the market. But I think humour can be very, very subtle as well, and it can be just what people take from it. Humour can be inferred. It doesn't necessarily have to be a laugh out funny book to still have that humour.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, do you think there's anything, even if it's not humorous, I'm struggling to think of anything that's beyond what is called middle grade, which drives me spare because we don't have middle grade in this country, but we still refer to our books as middle grade, which I think of as really top end primary. So, kind of 9, 10, 11, possibly a bit older if you're lucky. I can't think of anything beyond that now. Being published now, I can't think of anything I've bought that isn't issue based. I can't think of a romping adventure, humor or not.
Can I just jump in with saying that the only one that I could think of is an author I can't say his name properly, Phil Earle. So I just end up saying Flurl. Northern Soul is, a kind of tragic comedy, trying to find a date and it all going horribly wrong. And I don't think that's overly serious, and it definitely does have laugh out loud. It's great that it's a Barrington Stoke as well, because that's definitely an audience that will really appreciate that. What we need is 50 more of that.
Yeah.
About that level, because the book itself doesn't look babyish either, but that is just, when you finish it, you go, kind of enjoyed that. And that's all you needed from it. You didn't need to write a 3,000 word essay, and you didn't need to analyse the text. You just kind of enjoyed it, and then you went and had your lunch. That kind of idea.
So do you think, just thinking, does manga also cover really tough topics, or holding my hand up here, I've never read a manga book. Would you, could that be more lighthearted, or did they go down the same kind of route? I don't know. Donna?
I think there's both. Because manga's as broad as the audience that is out there. Again, we have to be very careful about the manga that we buy, because some can move on to very different topics that we certainly don't want lots of pictures of in your school library. But some of it is slapstick, old-fashioned, pie in the face type stuff. And that's why so many, I think in particular, wee boys absolutely love it. But there is an awful lot of manga that is quite dark, a lot of vampires, a lot of soul stealing, all that kind of thing, which comes from traditional stories in Japan. So I think you've got both sides to it, and I think manga lovers tend to just like almost anything, they don't seem to be overly picky or choosy, so they'll go from something very funny to something really quite dark, and it's the medium that they enjoy.
Yeah, because it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose, you know, when you think about the comics that used to be out, like the Beano, and that was all slapstick kind of humor, wasn't it? And I was just wondering whether that has transferred into things like manga, which, from what you're saying, it seems to have done at the lower end of the manga, I suppose. Is yeah, interesting. So, um, the next question, which I think we might have covered a little bit already. So, have you come across any teenage fiction that challenges the trend of heavy themes and brings more joy and fun or lightheartedness? And should we be actively seeking out these kinds of books for our collection? So, I suppose you've all said that it's that, well, more Jennifer, that it's there. But if our publishers are promoting the darker stuff, it is more difficult to find. So how can we, do you have any advice of how you would find, you know, if it's published, the more light-hearted, romping good story, as we're saying? Jennifer, how do you go about supporting your collections, I suppose?
I'm really fortunate that I've got a great relationship with a lot of our publishers,
Right.
and they're always sending me notices of what's coming next, and all the different ranges. For as part of YLG, we get a monthly newsletter from publishers that tell us all their upcoming titles this month, and that give us a wee blurb about them. So it's easily that way to identify the kind of themes that are coming up that way. A couple that I've really enjoyed recently that have kind of been a bit more light-hearted. Elle McNichol's latest, which is her debut YA, Some Like It Cold, which is a traditional romance. A really kind of, if you can call it innocent, an innocent romance, and not like the vampire-y stuff that we've seen recently. And it's just really kind of relatable to what young people are going through. Another one from a couple of years ago, Ellie Pilly is Brown, it focuses on race, but it's also about a teenage girl going through life at school and having a crush and sitting their exams and doing all that sort of stuff that our young people are doing every day. That's just life for them, because life is funny and it's hard and it's all of these emotions, and it's just kind of giving you the realism, the everyday life of that.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Donna? Do you think that there's, like, you did say that it was a bit of a challenge to find, you know, presumably you look, you know, how do the books end up in your library? How do you, is it publishers that you look at? Is it, you know, there's no longer any reps?
No.
So how do you do it?
Reps are a bit of a poison chalice sometimes as well. I think I do look on SLN, School Librarians Network. So if there's anything that I think I'm not too sure about, people are always putting questions on it, give me a list of good books. So I do look to my wider kind of colleagues across Britain. I just wish there was a lollies for older teens, because I think that would be absolutely brilliant. What I have found that kind of sates a little bit of them is sometimes sporting biographies and autobiographies can be, I think some of them are ridiculous, but some of the pupils find them quite funny because it's often kind of silly wee stories about, you know, how they got to different places. So sometimes you can, or also autobiographies, though you have to be careful for them, of comedians themselves. So the non-fiction and the way they're telling the story. And then you go back to people like Bill Bryson and things like that as well. Thunderbolt Kids, you know, you can push that on with some of the kids. So I still think there's a big gap. And I think there's also a big gap with male authors writing funny stories for boys. I think we often have the American female authors like Diane Sheldon and all that kind of stuff writing the kind of funny, quirky, you know, girl at high school story, falling in love. But I want male authors to write funny books for my teenage boys so that they can see themselves and maybe see themselves in a light-hearted way, because we're really down on teenage boys at the moment, like really down. Everything they do is toxic, and I don't find that at all with most of my pupils. So I want them to be empowered by the humour.
Yeah, I can say there does seem to be a gap in the market, because the Diary of a Wimpy Kid is what everybody talks about, you know. And if if you're talking to any, you know, if you're talking about literacy and people wanting to push their students on to read better, bigger and better, it's what a lot of children come back to as their comfort read. So, you know, you would think that the market would go, actually, there needs to be a lot more of that, because, you know, that obviously is what's hitting with those children that want that kind of book. It just seems mad to me that, you know, it isn't necessarily out there for them to read it, you know. It's strange. It is strange.
And if you
So
look at, sorry, and if you look at America, one of the biggest books in America is Dogman, which is funny, silly, slapstick, and a graphic novel. You know, more kids read Dogman than they read Batman. It's a bit of a seller. So, and they do say Dav Pilkey gets kids to read. So
yeah.
where's the next level up? He's making a fortune. He's got a movie. So if it's about money, then they could look at that.
Yeah. I think we need to find somebody who's going to write this for us, you know. So we think that there is a market for more humour, although we think that it, you know, there is stuff out there if we're looking for it. I'm going to say, and we've talked about some of the humour books that you've read, and you know that, but have more deeper themes, which is so there is a sort of a, there seems to me that there's a gap between the Diary of a Wimpy Kid and then the humour in life sort of deeper themes. So you can get humorous books, and I think it's a fairly big but. So how do you encourage reluctant readers to engage with teenage fiction, especially when so many books are emotionally or heavily, you know, themed or serious? Do you think that engages them, or do you think that puts them off? Jennifer, what do you think? Do you think the heavy themes are causing more of a problem for those reluctant readers?
I think often big books can be really unappealing, and often our issue books are quite lengthy.
Right.
Covers as well. I completely judge books by their covers. I like a lovely cover that's going to pull me in. So I often used to find when I worked with young people, it was going for the quicker reads, the Barrington Stoke, the kind of super readable ones, which often had lighter themes.
Right.
But sometimes they were heavy. But even if it was a heavy theme, if they didn't like it, it was a short book and they could move on to another one. So I think kind of targeting lengthwise would be kind of how you kind of start it off. And then if that's something that hooks them in, you can then look at exploring other collections as well.
Yeah, no, the Barrington Stokes. Is there something, is it only Barrington Stoke that writes those kind of short but for the right age level? Is there other publishers out there that do that? Donna, is there?
Yeah, there's a few others that do that as well. I can never, not off the top of my head. It's just that we all love Barrington Stoke so much.
Yeah.
But there are other companies that do kind of shorter, quicker reads. I think the big hook with the Barrington is that it does two things for a school librarian. One, your short, snappy, quality reads, and then you've got your dyslexia friendly on the other side. So it's kind of, but those often go hand in hand with your reluctant readers, but not always.
Yeah. So what would you say about, you know, hooking them in with? So is there other things that you can use apart from the Barrington Stokes?
I think it's all about building confidence, and again, getting them in to the room in the first place is a good place to do that. Also making sure that if they feel that they can speak comfortably about their reading, that they're not going to be judged by other pupils. We tend to stream further up in the school, so if you're looking at something like my third years, they tend to be in a class of kind of like-minded individuals. However, that like mind might be a peer pressure to say, reading's boring, we all hate books, look at you picking up a book, that's rubbish. So that's where I think, conversely, the gritty realism is the way to go with them. You know, you
Right.
get the punchy story, you get the books with the big strong words, and they go, well, you know, I didn't know books did that. I didn't know books could have that kind of thing. And heaven forfend, it might give them a little bit of street cred. Oh, I'm reading the one with the swearing in it. I'm reading the one with the 10 murders in it. You know, so you kind of get over the fact, it's a book. And you go, but actually, it's a good book. So I think it's the converse of that for some of our peoples, that you go hit them with the hard stuff, and then they go, oh, maybe I can do this thing, and maybe it's all right.
Yeah. You're nodding your head, Ruth. Do you find the same?
Yeah, I think that's a very good argument. And I think there's definitely, I mean, the thing for me about Barrington Stokes is that there's a real power in being able to write as well as, I mean, they're usually major authors, but who write long form, and being able to write that story in that novella form is brilliant. I mean, I think Patrice Lawrence's book Needle is one of the best books I've ever read. And I heard somebody saying the same thing about Keith Gray's Climbers the other day. And they are both Barrington Stokes books. So I'm absolutely, we're all over Barrington Stokes. And I love the fact that they do fit their age groups really well. They go right up to things that are very, very heavy in content, and they go right down. But we do a lot of I do a lot of graphic novel and kind of comics and those kind of things, because reading is reading, and audiobooks and all of those things. Those are my go-tos regardless of content. But I think if I'm trying to get away from issues, I'm going towards fantasy. Things like Songlight, which I know she's American, but it's a great book, or Frances Harding's writing. You know, they're not great for reluctant readers, because fantasy always tends to be 300 plus pages. If somebody writes me a Barrington Stokes fantasy, that's like the ultimate book, I think. But it's that, you know, and you're right. I mean, the books that started off my thinking about this, that on the Carnegie list this year, the one that everybody's so excited about, with the swearing, is actually, you know, it's a good hooking in book. Although I have to say, if you sound like I sound, that's a really difficult book to read. I need the audiobook version of that. I need that accent. I can't do that accent even in my head. It's Glasgow. There are 2 books on the list with this strong Glasgow accent. I'm like, I don't know. I can hear it, but not well enough to read it. It's really hard. Yeah. But those are pulling in books. I mean, you know, definitely for not necessarily in our school, but for the right demographic, those are great books for that.
Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's we've talked a lot about, or I have talked a lot about Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And there's this argument, isn't there, about a book being too young or too old. So do you think teenage fiction should push the boundaries, or is there a line that it shouldn't cross? What about you, Jennifer?
I think that's quite a difficult one, because every young person is different, and what they can handle and what they want is different. We often, year after year, we have this argument when the Carnegie shortlist comes out that it's geared too much towards older readers. And there's always a debate, should we split it? Should we have an award for older and an award for younger? And a response to that has always been, but who decides who reads what age group? Do we then get into censoring when they say, oh, you can't read this book because it's not for your age? I think young people are really good at self-censoring. I think if they don't like something, they're going to put it down and move on to something else. So I think it's, as we spoke about at the start, it's empowering the young people to be able to make those informed choices about what's in front of them and what's out there, what are options for them to read.
Absolutely. What about you, Jenna?
Well, particularly talking about the big sweary book, Ruth, I'll record myself reading.
Oh, yes.
If you want, and I'll send it to you. when I put on my really broad accent. I'm trying to be polite at the moment. I've used that book with over 1,000 pupils, because I've used it for the past couple of years, and I have like 9 million pupils. And that is a book that has stunned them into silence, and got them talking later on. They have found that really powerful, and only one pupil out of that 1,000, and I'm not exaggerating, I've got a lot of pupils, came to me and said, not too sure about the swearing. And I said, that's absolutely fine. But before I read it, I always say to them, do you want Mrs. Baird to swear at you this morning? And they all go, yes. On you go. What's different this morning, Mrs. Baird, from every other one? That's not true. And only one pupil said that they were uncomfortable. And I said, listen, I'll read out the book, but I won't put the swearing in it. But they all get it. And they all walk away from that book. And none of them have walked away saying, oh, that's the sweary book. They've all walked away going, oh, the start of that book really spoke to me. It's not the swearing that they take away from it. And I think that's what the adults take away from it, because we're so...
But that's because the words are on the page, I think. If that was an audiobook and you didn't read the words on the page, the swearing wouldn't stand out, because as you know, as you said on, I can't remember whether it was you, Donna, writing on SLN, that's the right vocabulary for that child, that character. And so, which is why I was so sorry that it's not been made. I can't find an audiobook of it anywhere. But it's calling out to hear that voice, because when you open the book, I mean, the C word, I can't think of any other book in my library with that word in it other than a dictionary. That's just not a word that features certainly in most of our students' vocabulary, but it fits in that voice, absolutely. But that's really difficult.
Did A Curious Incident of the Dog of the Night
Had the F word? I don't think it.
Okay.
I might be wrong. I don't remember.
Yeah, no, because that one particularly was quite, raised, problems, and and it's now a theatre production.
And an A-level text, if not a GCSE text. Yeah.
So it's really, but what you've just struck a chord with me is the fact that if it's written in a book, you're either reading it in your head or it's being read out aloud. And if it's not language that you personally wouldn't use, then it becomes awkward, because we all watch films where there's swearing in it. And because it's within context, it is the person, it's the character, it fits, then that's acceptable. But when it's in a book, there's something else, and maybe it's the fact that you have to either read it out yourself or that you have to read it on the page. Fascinating. I think it's a really clever thing though, and I'm not sure that you can always get around it. But like you said, I think Donna, you said, oh no, I think it was Jennifer, said that actually they do censor, that it's almost easier to censor what you're reading than it is for you to censor what you're watching on social media. That you can close the book in a way that you can't with the videos that come up on social media. So, I think it's a very safe medium in this very shocking world that we live in. It's an interesting one, and I do think it empowers you. As a teenager, my mum had a particular, she liked me to read Georgia Taylor when I was at the right age. And so I was very much into those kind of historical fiction romances. And I remember finding a book, and I can't tell you the author or the title, but it was about a teenage girl who got pregnant and got sent away to have her baby, and I sat in the I remember vividly sitting in the library reading this book and just being absolutely fascinated. I think I even hid the book on the shelf because I couldn't take it home, and the librarian obviously just left it there for me because it was always still there when I came back. But it's about that, isn't it? And I felt it wasn't going to make me have a teenage pregnancy, and it didn't shock me, but it was like a world that I just wasn't involved. It was like fascinating, and I think that's what fiction does for children. It allows them to walk in other people's shoes in a way that is safe, I suppose, is the way to describe it. It's fascinating. Absolutely.
Can I ask a question then? This is naturally leading me to, which is we have a system in our library where students below the age of year 9, so 13, 14, have to have their parents' permission to read some of our books. And what's happened, therefore, as a consequence of that, is that the Carnegie list, half of the Carnegie list fall above that bracket and half of them below. I'm aware that that is a form of censorship, but I'm also aware that I have to answer to my year 7 parents who say, what on earth are you doing giving my child this? And I agree that they self-censor, but it's a very difficult line to tread as a librarian between that level of responsibility and, you know, and giving them that freedom to make the decision for themselves.
Donna, have you got an answer for that one?
Well, I skirted around all those issues because I actually, whenever I shadowed the Carnegie, I actually used older pupils. And my problem was that they were annoyed with the younger texts. So you can't win. You can win nothing as a school librarian. But the last time I shadowed the Carnegies, just due to working in 2 schools and I can't spin all the plates, was actually the last time that Brian had a book on the shortlist, which was Mr. Dogbites, which was about the boy with Tourette's. And so I sent a letter home, just wanted to cover myself, just wanted to make sure, and every single parent signed it, and the boys read it like this, like it was right in front of their face. Look what I'm reading that. And I had pupils years later, out of all the books they'd ever read, that was the one they remembered. It wasn't the swearing they remembered a couple of incidents. Oh, I remember the book when he did that, remember that bit at the disco, you know. So it's interesting. So I didn't have that issue because I purposely chose 15-year-olds.
But would you let your year 7s read that? Is that your 11-year-old?
I would have to have a wee chat with them. I would say, listen, it sits where we have 3rd year for our pupils, which is about 14, 15. And I would say, can you just let your parents know about that? And then they let me know about it. So it is there and it is available, but I'm not their parent. And I always think with books like this, you meet the child where they are. So some of my children might be bang on with that language, use that language, hear that language at home, and that's water off a duck's back. Others, it would shock the living daylights out of them. So I just want, again, no matter what text they're choosing, I want it to come from a place of knowledge.
Yeah, and I do think that you're right, Ruth. It goes back to the fact that, you know, your school librarians and parents have the right to censor what their children read if that is what is appropriate to them. So yeah, I think it's a fine line to tread, but yeah, certainly it would be a case of parents' choice and then the children themselves. Yeah.
But they're all doing what you're doing, Elizabeth, and reading them in the library regardless.
Yeah, exactly.
If they take them home, they can read them, can't they? I don't go around checking.
Not giving anybody any ideas, of course. So let's, I've just noticed it's I start these conversations thinking, oh, we're going to be finished in 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden it's nearly 50 minutes in. So I'm going to just pull this round so that we have time to finish off. If you could build the perfect teenage fiction starter pack, 5 books that every teenager should read, what would be on your list and why? Can I start with Jennifer, please?
I have to admit, I haven't prepared for this question.
Okay.
I just recently moved house, and it was only last night that I got my books out of their boxes and on the shelves. So I had to have a quick look and kind of choose a few just to kind of appeal to all ages.
Absolutely.
I think a verse novel is a great option to give to young people. Not everyone likes poetry. I'm not mad about poetry myself, but in the form of a novel, it's shorter. It can be easier to kind of engage. There isn't a wasted word. So everything you read, you need to read to get the story. So often that's a kind of a good way. And if you just shy away from the fact that it's a poem, a lot of young people will go for that. I love Sarah Crossan. I love all her work. I think the stories she can tell using that style is just fantastic, and such a range of stories, and
Absolutely.
really getting to the heart of young people's experiences. I think is a great way to start. Yep.
I must admit, there must have been a book written in poetry that must have been on one of the Carnegie lists, because it isn't something that I would pick up out of choice. And it's true that actually after reading the first couple of pages, it's like, oh, this is poetry, oh, you know. But actually, because the story is so well written, that you almost forget that it's poetry. And it's very clever, very clever. So I would agree. I think that's a great choice. Maybe we can find a few that we can list in the show notes below that people might try. But a great show, Jennifer. Thank you. What about you, Donna?
Oh, I've got my list of 5.
Good, well done.
I did my homework, Jennifer. And I've got my books out. So anyway, Hatchet by Gary Paulsen is my go-to book for kids that have not read for a while. Gary Paulsen basically kind of wrote it a little bit about his own life. So it's about surviving in the Canadian wilderness, and it's got thrills and spills and some helpful advice if you're ever lost in the Canadian wilderness as well. It's an absolutely fantastic action-packed adventure. My next one is Scythe by Neal Shusterman, because it just blew me away. I think it's an absolutely incredible book and my pupils love it. Fable by Adrienne Young, because I love a swashbuckling romance and it's got a really nice front cover. The Hunger Games. How many kids are now coming to you and they've never read The Hunger Games, and it makes you feel like 1,000 years old. So I think The Hunger Games is brilliant because for a lot of young people, it's the first time they've read anything like that treats them like an adult. And the last one is a big issues book by Samira Ahmed. It's Internment, which is absolutely incredible, about a kind of America that's supposedly a dystopia, but it feels like America anyway, about internment camps for American Muslims in the middle of the desert, which ties in with what America did to second generation Japanese during the Second World War. So issues, fun, swashbuckling, survival, and a bit of snogging. There you go.
Fantastic. Well, if you don't mind sharing that list with me, I will stick it in the show notes. That'd be brilliant. Thank you. Ruth, do you? I don't know whether you have a list of 5 books, but
well, I didn't write anything down, but I do. I mean, the trouble is stopping at 5, isn't it? I definitely agree about verse novels, and I think they're an interesting teen YA phenomena. There are very, very few adult verse novels, and they also tend to be quite issues based. They're great for reluctant readers because they tend to be conversation and action heavy. Funnily enough, despite the fact how poetic poetry is, if you understand where I'm going, there's very little description. But I would say Matt Goodyear's final year, I mean, just outstandingly brilliant. I think a graphic novel, and I think probably something like Mouse, because I just think that getting that variety in, it's a classic, it's accessible, and it's doing a bit of history. I love Ruta Sepetty's work. She would have to be in there, as would probably Frances Harding, although it's controversial. I'm a big fantasy person, so if she wasn't in there, Terry Pratchett would be. And then I would want something funny, but I don't know where I'd go for it. I might go with Steady for this from last year's Carnegie list, because it did make me cry with laughter, and I don't laugh out loud very easily. So yeah, I'd be looking for that variety really in my 5-pack.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So we're at the end. Thank you very much for joining me today, Donna, Jennifer, and Ruth again. As always, anything we've talked about will be in the show notes below. So if we have got book lists, we will put them below. If you'd like to comment on anything you've heard today, we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have book lists that you would like to share with us, please do. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on future discussions. Thank you very much for listening.